Okay, so welcome to the second part of this video. Beforehand, we've covered these questions that you might get. Okay, so we finished off with the equilibrium and we got 25 and we got 3.5 for the consumer price and 2.5 for the producer price. Okay, and we finished off working that out. So now we're going to move on to looking at the consumer expenditure. Okay, so the consumer expenditure is dead easy. It's the price times by the quantity. So the original consumer expenditure was 3 times 50. 3 times by 50, which equals 150. Okay, so whatever the units are, it's 150. The original producer revenue, again, is the price times by the quantity, which is, again, 150. Okay, so that's nice and simple. So we've worked out the original ones of these. So now we need to work out how much consumers now spend. Okay, what's been the change? So we just go 3.5 times by 25. 3.5 times by 25. And that gives us 87.5. Okay. So now we need to take away the original from that, and that would leave us with, so minus 150 would lead us to an answer of minus 62.5. Okay, so that minus is just saying that basically we're spending 62.5 less than we were before. Okay, so consumer expenditure has gone down by 62.5. Okay, so now we're looking at producer revenue. Same again. We look at the price that producers get, 2.5. So that's a 0.5 times by the quantity. So the new quantity is 25. And that gives us 62.5. Okay, so 62.5. And again, we need to take away 150 from this to see how it's changed. And again, as we can automatically work out, there's less expenditure, less revenue. So 87.5 less revenue. Okay, so now we've done the producer revenue as well. So we can't do government expenditure because that's to do with subsidies. So the government aren't spending any money here, but they are spending tax. They are getting tax revenue. So tax revenues are going to be this square here that I'm drawing in green. Okay, so not very accurately. So this square here. So we just do height times by width. So the quantity times by the tax. So dead easy. So 1 times 25, and that equals 25. Okay, so quite straightforward there, and that's the total government revenue. You might also be asked, so it says here the totals and so forth. Okay, so we've done all that, we've worked that out. So the next thing then, so let me take away all of this, okay, because we're going to move to the next point. Okay, so let me get the pen back on. So we've worked out tax revenue. So now we have to work out the incidence of tax. So this is where we're talking about total or per unit. Per unit, dead simple. All we have to do is look here. So the consumers used to pay 3, they now pay 3.5. So per unit, they pay 0.5 of the tax. So therefore, per unit, looking at producers, they used to get 3, but now they only get 2.5. So their burden is also 0.5. Okay, so when we're working out the total, all we do now is 0.5 times by 25, and that gives us 12.5. Okay, and it's exactly the same for the producer, so they share the burden, which means the elasticities for supply and demand must be the same. Okay, so they share the burden, and we can see that on this diagram, the fact that these rectangles are the same there. So they share the burden. So on producer and consumer, so we've done this. Okay, done. And then the last thing that we need to do is calculate the changes in consumer surplus and producer surplus. Okay, so I'm going to change my pen to red. So we have to work out the original producer surplus, which is everything above the original price and below the demand curve. So again, we just do times height times by width divided by 2. It's just a triangle, so dead easy. So we'll do 1 times by 50 and divide that by 2, and we get 25. Okay, and again, you probably guessed this is going to be the same. So again, it's 1 times by 25 equals 25. So again, consumer and producer surplus for each one was 25. So now, where do we look now? So I'm going to change this to a black color. Okay, blue even. I'm going to change this to blue. So what does the new consumer surplus look like? Well, it's everything above the price, so everything above PC and below the demand curve. So this is the new consumer surplus, and everything below the price, so below the producer price this time, is the producer surplus. So again, we just go 1, and it's the same for both. 1's there and the quantity is 25, so times by 25 divided by 2, so that gives us 12.5. Okay, so each of these blue triangles, okay, is 12.5. So we can see consumer and producer surplus has gone down by 12.5 each. So we've done this, we've calculated changes in consumer and producer surplus. What you might also be asked to do, which I won't go over here, okay, is work out the deadweight loss. So this triangle here. Okay. So again, that's just going to be 1, the height, and then divided by 25, times by 25, because that's the difference between here and here, divided by 2. So that's going to be 12.5 as well. So nice and straightforward. And then the only other thing is this section here. Perform the above given a change in PD and then in PES. Okay, so basically we're saying if we change the B or D variable, okay, so the D variable, the B variable, okay, so we change the responsiveness, so the elasticity of the demand or supply. So if we changed it to 100, so we changed the linear equation for demand to 100, that means it's going to be more elastic. So if we change that, we'd probably expect more burden to be on the producer, and we'll just have to show that. Okay. However, if we changed, so let me rub that out, so if we changed it to 20, okay, or 10, change that to 10 and left that the same, now the price elasticity demand is more inelastic, so we would expect there more burden to be on the consumer because it's more inelastic. So the same as when we've looked at cigarettes and so forth. The producer can pass more of the burden onto the consumer because they know that they're not going to lead to a huge fall in quantity demanded. Okay, so now you understand what that means. You can maybe do that yourself now. So have a go at changing this equation on this equation. So you change the essentially the elasticity and see what happens to the consumer burden and the producer burden and the consumer surplus and the producer surplus and the government revenue. Okay, so that's everything you need to know there for taxes. For subsidies, all we're going to change is when we were talking about PC being -1. Okay, so if we had a subsidy of 1 per tax. Now that's just going to be a plus sign. Okay, so everything changes to plus, and the supply line, okay, we just plot 1 down there, then we go along here, plot 1, and then we link those lines together. That would be our S with subsidy. Okay, obviously we do this on a different diagram so we don't have all this score, and then you just go through the same process and work out the consumer surplus, the producer surplus. So you need to have a look at the diagram because it's slightly different in terms of where the revenue and everything is. Okay, but it's still price times quantity and so on. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that. So that's the end of the second video, part 2 of the second video. Any questions, please let me know.